The name was stitched inside the hem in faded blue thread, so small that my daughter almost cut through it when she tried to shorten the dress. Clara Vale. At first, it meant nothing to either of us. It was only a name hidden beneath 3 layers of yellowed satin. In a wedding dress Hannah had bought for $19 from a church basement sale outside Pittsburgh. The dress was too long. The lace had darkened with age, and one pearl button was missing from the sleeve. Hannah loved it immediately. She said old dresses had already survived somebody else's expectations. But when I searched the name Clara Vale that night, I found a black and white photograph of a young woman wearing the same dress. The photograph had been printed in newspapers across Pennsylvania in October of 1981. Clara Vale was 22 years old when she disappeared 4 days before her wedding. Her car was found beside a reservoir. Her purse was inside. Her body was never recovered. And beneath the photograph was a sentence that made the room around me seem to change shape. Clara Vale was the only daughter of industrialist Benjamin Vale and heir to an estate then valued at $14 million. I remember staring at the screen while the washing machine turned slowly in the basement below me. Why had Clara's wedding dress been folded inside a cardboard box at a church sale 45 years later? Why had someone hidden her name inside the hem instead of sewing it onto a normal label? And why, tucked into the lining beneath that name, was there a tiny brass key wrapped in a strip of paper bearing my late mother's handwriting? Good day, dear listeners. It's Nora again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Keene. I was 49 years old when my daughter brought that dress into my kitchen. I worked as a billing compliance auditor for a regional hospital network. That job sounds dull until you understand what it really means. I spent my days looking for things that did not belong. A procedure charged twice, a date that fell on a Sunday when the clinic had been closed, a decimal point shifted one place to the right, a signature added after the fact. Most mistakes are ordinary. A tired employee clicks the wrong field. A code is copied from an old form. But deliberate fraud has a different rhythm. It repeats itself carefully. It tries to appear random while depending on everyone being too busy, too trusting, or too embarrassed to ask questions. I had learned not to accuse. I had learned to observe. Numbers do not become defensive. Paper does not change its story when you walk into the room. At home, my life was modest and predictable. Hannah and I lived in a narrow brick house in Dormont, the kind with a small porch, an unfinished basement, and a backyard just large enough for tomatoes. My husband, Daniel, had died 6 years earlier from a stroke at 52. Grief had not destroyed me in the dramatic way people sometimes imagine. It had changed the scale of things. A quiet kitchen felt larger. A second coffee cup became painful. Grocery shopping for one fewer person required a kind of arithmetic I hated. Hannah had been 19 when her father died. She stayed close to home afterward, finished community college, and trained as a physical therapy assistant. She was 25 when she became engaged to a gentle elementary school teacher named Owen. They were paying for their wedding themselves. That was why she bought a $19 dress. "I can fix the sleeves," she said when she carried the box through my back door. "And if it looks terrible, I've wasted less than dinner at a chain restaurant." She set the dress across my kitchen table while rain tapped against the windows. The satin was ivory once, though time had turned it the color of old paper. The bodice was simple, with narrow lace around the collar and tiny covered buttons down the back. It was not fashionable by modern standards, but it had been made well. I knew that before touching it. The seams were straight, the hand stitching was tight, the lining had been fitted instead of glued. Whoever made it had expected the dress to matter. Hannah turned slowly in front of the hallway mirror after trying it on. For a moment, I could see both the woman she had become and the little girl who used to stand on Daniel's shoes while he danced with her in the living room. "It's beautiful," I told her. "It will be." She smiled at herself, but then her expression changed. "There's something scratching my ankle." We laid the skirt across the table and examined the inner hem. One section had been closed with thread that did not match the rest. The original stitching was cream. This was blue. Someone repaired it, Hannah said. Maybe. I brought out my mother's old sewing scissors. My mother, Evelyn, had been a seamstress for most of her life. She worked from our dining room when I was a child, altering bridesmaid dresses, school uniforms, winter coats, and occasionally wedding gowns for women who could not afford bridal shops. She had died 12 years earlier. I still kept her wooden sewing box in the hall closet. I rarely opened it, but I could never bring myself to give it away. As I separated the blue stitches, a narrow strip of fabric came loose. Clara's name appeared underneath. Then the brass key fell onto the table. It was no longer than the top joint of my thumb. Hannah picked up the paper wrapped around it. Mom, I knew before she said anything. The handwriting was my mother's. She formed capital letters with a slight backward slant and crossed every T twice, once lightly and then again as though she did not trust the first line. The paper contained only 6 words. Mercer. Box 214, ask for Helen. Hannah looked at me. Who is Helen? I don't know. Did Grandma know Clara Vale? I don't know that either. Those 3 words became the beginning of everything. I did not tell Hannah how unsettled I felt. She was planning a wedding. Her father would not be there. I did not want an old dress to become another shadow over what should have been a hopeful time. I placed the key and paper in a sandwich bag and told her I would look into it. That night, after Hannah left, I searched Clara's name. The first results were brief references on genealogy websites and old newspaper indexes. Then I found a digitized article from the Pittsburgh Press. The photograph showed Clara standing beside her father at a charity dinner. She had dark hair, a long face, and a restrained smile that did not reach her eyes. The article described Benjamin Vale as the owner of Vale Precision Components, a company that manufactured parts for rail systems and industrial equipment. His wife had died when Clara was 16. Clara studied art history, volunteered at a literacy foundation, and was engaged to a young attorney named Robert Wexler. 4 days before their wedding, she left her father's home after dinner. According to Robert, she had been anxious about marriage and wanted time alone. Her car was found the next morning. There was no sign of violence. Within a year, Clara was declared legally dead. Benjamin Vale died 3 years later. His will placed most of his estate into a charitable trust overseen by Robert Wexler and a private bank. I read that last line twice. Robert Wexler had later married Clara's cousin, Marion. He became a prominent estate attorney, a political donor, and eventually chairman of the Vale Foundation. He was still alive. The foundation was now managed by his son, Richard Wexler. That name felt familiar. I searched it and understood why. Richard Wexler was the senior partner of Wexler, Shaw & Pike, the law firm that represented my hospital network in several regulatory matters. I had sat across from him twice during compliance reviews. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, composed, and unfailingly polite. He remembered assistants' names. He sent handwritten thank you notes. He never raised his voice. He also had a reputation for ending disputes before they became public. I sat there for a long time. Then I searched Mercer. There were several Mercer streets, a Mercer County, and a small borough north of Pittsburgh. But the key looked like the kind used for a bank safe deposit box. I searched for banks in Mercer that had existed in 1981. Only one still operated under its original charter, Commonwealth and Mercer Trust. The following morning, I called during my lunch break. A woman in customer service listened while I explained that I had found an old key marked with a box number. "Do you know the name on the account?" she asked. "No." "Then I'm afraid we cannot confirm whether a box exists." "I understand. Is there anyone named Helen working there?" There was a pause. "Not currently." "Was there in the past?" "I cannot provide employment information." Her tone was professional, but something in it changed when I said the name Helen. It was small. Most people would have missed it. A half-second of silence. A breath taken too carefully. "I'm not asking for private records," I said. "The note is in my late mother's handwriting." The woman asked for my name and telephone number. "Someone will return your call." No one did. 2 days later, I received a call at work from a blocked number. "Mrs. Keene, yes. My name is Richard Wexler." I looked through the glass wall of my office. My supervisor was speaking to someone beside the copier. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I believe we've met, he continued warmly. During the North Hills billing review. We have. I understand you recently contacted Commonwealth and Mercer Trust about an old key. He said it as casually as though we were discussing parking. Validation. I did not answer immediately. How did you learn that? The bank's historic accounts are administered through a trust and connected to my firm. Your inquiry raised a routine notification. I knew enough about financial privacy to understand how unusual that explanation was. I see. I suspect you found something belonging to my family. Why do you suspect that? He gave a quiet laugh. Because families leave strange things behind. Old keys, old letters, old misunderstandings. His voice remained pleasant. If the item is connected to the Vale estate, I would be happy to send a courier. There is no reason for you to trouble yourself. I looked down at my legal pad. Beside his name, I wrote the time. 11:17 a.m. You don't know what I found, I said. No, but I know enough to believe it has no practical value. Then why send a courier? There was silence. Not much, just enough. That is a fair question, he said. Call it professional tidiness. I'll think about it, of course. Before ending the call, he added, Margaret, old family tragedies attract imaginative people. Sometimes they turn coincidence into accusation. I would hate for your daughter's wedding to be disturbed by something so irrelevant. My hand stopped moving. I had never mentioned Hannah. I did not know it yet, but that was the first mistake he made. That evening, I told Hannah everything. She listened without interrupting, seated across from me at the kitchen table with both hands around a mug of tea. When I finished, she asked, how did he know about the wedding? I don't know. Could the church sale have had our information? I paid cash, she said, and I didn't give anyone my name. We examined the dress again. There was no brand label, no dry cleaning tag, only Clara's name inside the hem and the small pocket where the key had been hidden. My mother had altered thousands of garments. It was possible she had worked on this one, but why would she hide a safe deposit key inside it? I brought down her sewing box. The top tray held buttons, chalk, measuring tape, and pins in a tomato-shaped cushion. Beneath it were patterns and receipts, most faded beyond reading. At the bottom, I found a narrow black notebook. My mother recorded every client carefully, name, date, garment, price. I began with 1981, September 14, C Vale, bridal hem, sleeves, private fitting, no charge. September 17, C Vale, additional lining. September 21, C, cancelled. Then, several pages later, on October 3, H. Mercer, coat repair, box secured. Hannah leaned over my shoulder. Helen Mercer? Maybe. Another entry appeared in December. R.W. asking questions told him nothing. The room felt colder than it had a moment before. My mother had known Clara. She had also been questioned by someone whose initials matched Robert Wexler. I photographed every page. Then I placed the notebook, key, and note inside a fireproof document pouch and took it to work the next morning. Not because my office was especially secure, but because Richard Wexler had already reached into the boundary of my private life. I no longer wanted the evidence in my house. At noon, I searched county records and newspaper archives from the library's digital portal. Clara's disappearance had been treated as a probable suicide, though no note was found. Robert told police she had been emotionally unstable. Her father refused to believe it. A smaller article mentioned that 1 week before she disappeared, Clara had removed several personal items from the Vale house. No list was provided. Another article quoted a household employee who claimed Clara had argued with Robert about money and papers. The employee later withdrew her statement. Her name was Helen Mercer. That night, I drove north. I did not tell Hannah until I was already on the highway. She was angry, but I promised I would not open the box alone if one existed. Commonwealth and Mercer Trust occupied a limestone building near the courthouse. The lobby smelled of polished wood and old paper. Brass lamps cast soft circles across marble counters. I arrived 20 minutes before closing. A woman in her 70s sat at a side desk beneath a sign that read Privatit Clonscarvis. Her nameplate said Helen Dowson. When I placed the brass key on her desk, all color left her face. She looked at me, then at the key. Where did you get this? Inside a wedding dress. Her fingers tightened around a fountain pen. What dress? One belonging to Clara Vale. She pressed a button beneath her desk. For one alarmed second, I thought she was calling security. Instead, a shade lowered over the glass panel behind her. "What is your name?" she asked. "Margaret Keene." My mother was Evelyn Keene. Helen closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. I wondered if Evelyn had destroyed it. Destroyed what? She stood slowly. "Come with me." She led me through a locked door and down a narrow staircase into the bank's original vault. The walls were steel. The air smelled dry and metallic. Box 214 was in the lowest row. Helen did not ask for identification. She did not consult a computer. She used a second key from a chain around her neck. The door opened. Inside was a long metal container sealed with brittle wax. On the lid, written in my mother's hand, were the words, "To be opened only if Clara cannot return safely." Helen did not touch it. "She trusted your mother," she said, "and your mother trusted me." "Is Clara alive?" Helen's face changed in a way I will never forget. Not surprise, not grief, fear. "I don't know," she said. Then someone knocked on the vault door. A man's voice called from the stairwell. "Mrs. Dawson, is everything all right?" Helen closed the box so quickly that the metal edge struck her wrist. "You have to leave," she whispered. "What is inside?" "Not here." She slipped the container into a gray bank pouch and pushed it toward me. "Take the rear stairwell. Do not go through the lobby." I stared at her. "You're giving me the contents of a box without paperwork?" "The paperwork was changed years ago." "What does that mean?" "It means that if you ask permission, the wrong person will know before you reach your car." Fear is strange. It does not always make you small. Sometimes it makes the world very precise, and I noticed the tremor in Helen's left hand, the sound of the man descending the stairs, the thin red line where the box had cut her wrist. I took the pouch. The rear stairwell opened into an alley beside the bank. Rain had begun, fine and cold. I walked 2 blocks without looking behind me, entered a pharmacy, and exited through the opposite door. Only then did I call Hannah. "Mom, what happened?" "I found the box. What was inside? I haven't opened it." "Where are you, Mercer?" "You promised." "I know. Do not go home." "That was my daughter's decision, not mine." She told me to drive to a busy diner near Cranberry Township and wait for her. Owen brought her. We sat in a booth beneath a flickering sign while trucks passed on the wet highway outside. The waitress filled our coffee cups without asking questions. The bank pouch contained a sealed envelope, a cassette tape, 3 Polaroid photographs, a notarized affidavit, and a bundle of financial documents. The first photograph showed Clara beside my mother in our old dining room. Clara was wearing the wedding dress. The second showed Clara holding a newborn baby. The third showed the same baby wrapped in a hospital blanket beside a card bearing a date. August 12, 1982. That was 10 months after Clara disappeared. Hannah covered her mouth. I unfolded the affidavit. My mother had signed it in 1987. I, Evelyn Keene, declare that Clara Vale came to my home on September 18, 1981, seeking assistance. She stated that Robert Wexler had used forged authorizations to transfer funds from accounts established by her late mother. She believed he intended to have her declared mentally incompetent after their marriage. The statement continued. Clara had discovered that Robert and her cousin Marion were already involved romantically. She planned to cancel the wedding and give evidence to her father. Before she could do so, Robert threatened to expose a secret pregnancy. The child was not his. Clara feared her father's reaction and the public scandal that would follow. Robert offered to protect her if she signed control of her inheritance into a marital trust. She refused. With my mother's help, Clara left Pittsburgh under another name, Helen Mercer, who worked in the Vale household before taking a position at the bank, arranged temporary access to money that legally belonged to Clara. The final paragraph was the most disturbing. If Clara Vale is declared dead, it will be through fraud. She was alive when she left Pennsylvania. Robert Wexler knows this. He has benefited from representing otherwise to the court. The diner seemed to grow silent around us. Owen picked up one of the financial documents. "This is a trust schedule," he said. He taught 4th grade. He did not know trusts, but even he could see the number. 42 million, adjusted through asset sales and reinvestment. I looked at the photograph of Clara holding the baby. "Where is the child?" Hannah asked. I turned over the Polaroid. In my mother's handwriting was a name, Rebecca Ann. Below it was another sentence, placed with Daniel and Margaret Keene through St. Agnes arrangement. I stopped breathing. Hannah read it before I could cover the words. She looked at me. Dad! I read the sentence again, placed with Daniel and Margaret Keene. The date was 2 years before my marriage. The baby in the photograph could not have been Hannah. Then I understood. My husband had been adopted. Daniel knew his adoptive parents were not his biological parents, but he had been told almost nothing. St. Agnes' home had closed in the 1990s. His records were sealed and later reported damaged in a flood. The infant in Clara's arms was Daniel. My husband had been the missing heiress's son, and Hannah was Clara Vale's granddaughter. I sat there for a long time. The waitress brought pie none of us had ordered. Owen thanked her and moved the plates aside. Hannah's face had gone pale. My father's mother might still be alive. Yes, and this lawyer knows. I think his family has known for 45 years. We listened to the cassette in Owen's car because none of us owned a tape player. He found an old portable recorder in the diner manager's office, and the manager allowed us to borrow it after Owen left his driver's license as security. Clara's voice emerged beneath a layer of static. She sounded young, controlled, and exhausted. My name is Clara Elizabeth Vale. I am recording this on September 22, 1981. She described Robert's fraud in detail, account numbers, transfer dates, names of shell companies. She said Robert had used his access as her fiancé and legal advisor to prepare documents giving him authority over assets he claimed were at risk from her emotional instability. She had found letters between Robert and Marion. She had also found evidence that Robert intended to use her marriage to gain voting control of Vale Precision components. Then Clara said something that changed the legal meaning of everything. My father does not know I am pregnant. The child's father died in a construction accident in June. Robert learned of the pregnancy from a medical bill. He has threatened to tell my father the child is his, and later use that claim to control the child's inheritance. Clara planned to disappear only long enough to give birth safely. She intended to return with proof. She never did. At the end of the recording, her voice became softer. Evelyn says truth is like a seam. Even when hidden inside a garment, it holds the whole thing together. I hope she is right. I turned off the recorder. Hannah began to cry. Not loudly. She pressed her forehead against the passenger window while Owen held her hand. I did not cry. Not then. My mind had already moved into the familiar discipline of an audit. What could be verified? What was hearsay? What had been altered? Who had benefited? The story was emotionally powerful, but courts do not operate on emotional power. They operate on admissible evidence, authenticated documents, statutes, and timelines. I was not brave. I was careful. The next morning, I called a probate attorney named Julia Navarro. She had represented a hospital employee in an estate dispute and had a reputation for being thorough rather than theatrical. I did not tell her everything over the phone. I said, I possess documents connected to a person declared dead in 1982 and believed the declaration may have been fraudulent. She gave me an appointment that afternoon. Julia's office was above a bakery in Squirrel Hill. It was small, warm, and crowded with books. She listened for almost an hour without interrupting. Then she examined the affidavit through a clear evidence sleeve. Do you know how your mother obtained these documents? No. Do you know whether the tape has been copied? Not yet. Has anyone else handled it? Me, my daughter, and her fiancé. From now on, nobody touches the originals without gloves. She asked us to write separate statements describing exactly how and where each item had been found. She photographed the bank pouch, key, dress, stitching, and notebook. Then she looked at Hannah. I need to ask something personal. Are you prepared to learn that the family history you grew up with may not be accurate? Hannah glanced at me. My father was a good man. Nothing changes that. Julia nodded. That is the right distinction. Within 48 hours, she hired a forensic document examiner, an audio specialist, and a genealogical investigator. She also filed an emergency petition under seal seeking preservation of all Vale estate and foundation records. We did not contact Richard Wexler. We did not contact the press. We did not mention the discovery to extended family. Julia's first rule was simple. Never warn someone before you know what they can destroy. The document examiner concluded that my mother's affidavit, notebook entries, and writing on the photographs were consistent with verified samples from tax forms and old business records. The tape was authentic to the early 1980s and showed no sign of splicing. The financial documents were more complicated. Some were copies of bank ledgers showing transfers from Clara's personal trust into companies controlled by Robert's legal clients. Several companies dissolved soon afterward. Funds then moved through partnerships that acquired shares in Vale Precision Components. The structure was deliberate. In billing fraud, people often try to hide theft inside complexity. They assume the number of steps will make the original act disappear. It does not. Every transfer creates a seam. Julia's genealogist located Daniel's adoption decree in a sealed county archive. The file listed his birth mother under an alias, Catherine Reed, but the date of birth matched the Polaroid. A witness signature belonged to Helen Mercer. DNA provided the strongest connection. Hannah submitted a sample through a court-approved laboratory. Julia located a living maternal cousin of Clara's in Ohio, who agreed to participate confidentially. The results showed a relationship consistent with great-niece and great-aunt. Hannah was biologically connected to the Vale family, but that did not prove Clara was alive after 1982, and it did not automatically make Hannah an heir. Trust law had changed. Assets had been distributed. Charitable organizations had relied on court orders for decades. Julia warned us not to imagine a simple ending. Even when fraud is proven, she said, time complicates justice. Then Helen Dawson disappeared. The bank claimed she had retired without notice. Her telephone was disconnected. When Julia sent an investigator to her home, the house was empty. Neighbors said a black car had collected her 2 nights after my visit. No one saw her return. That was the first moment I became truly afraid. Until then, the danger had felt historical. Old documents, dead people, financial structures. Helen's disappearance made it current. Someone was still managing the story. Richard called me that evening. I'm told you retained counsel, he said. That is correct. I wish you had spoken with me first. I did speak with you. His tone remained kind. Then you know I approached you respectfully. You asked for evidence you claimed held no value. I offered to spare you an unpleasant family matter. It is my family matter. He paused. I assume you have reached a theory about your late husband. I am not discussing evidence with you. Margaret, you are an intelligent woman. Intelligence includes understanding scale. The Vale Foundation supports clinics, scholarships, food programs. A reckless allegation could harm thousands of innocent people. There it was, not a threat, a burden. He was placing every child who received a scholarship and every patient treated by a funded clinic on my side of the table, as though asking for the truth meant taking medicine from their hands. I have not contacted the media, I said. I appreciate that. My lawyer will communicate with you. I hope she also explains limitation periods. She has. And the cost of litigation? Yes. And the risk to Hannah's professional reputation if people believe she is attempting to claim a charitable fortune based on a second-hand dress. I wrote every word. He continued gently. Your daughter is getting married. She deserves joy, not scrutiny. You have mentioned her wedding twice. I am trying to be humane. No, I said. You are trying to sound humane. The silence that followed was longer this time. Take care, Margaret. He ended the call. I sent my notes to Julia immediately. She replied with 4 words. Do not answer him again. The following week, an envelope arrived at my house. Inside was a photocopy of an old psychiatric evaluation describing Clara as delusional, unstable, and prone to suicidal thinking. There was no note. The doctor who signed the evaluation had died in 1994. Julia's investigator found that he had shared office space with Robert Wexler during the year Clara disappeared. More important, the document referred to Clara as Mrs. Wexler. Clara and Robert had never married. The evaluation had either been prepared in anticipation of the wedding or created afterward by someone who forgot the marriage never occurred. It was a small inconsistency. Small inconsistencies are often load-bearing. Julia obtained the probate file that declared Clara dead. The psychiatric evaluation had been used as supporting evidence. So had a letter supposedly written by Clara to Robert. The letter said she felt unworthy of marriage and wanted to enter the water and become quiet. The document examiner compared it with Clara's college records. The signature was a simulation. The writing was not hers. The death declaration had been supported by forged evidence. That finding allowed Julia to expand the case. She filed a civil complaint alleging fraud upon the probate court, conversion of trust assets, concealment of an heir, and civil conspiracy. Because the financial transfers crossed state lines and involved tax-exempt organizations, federal investigators became interested. Richard responded exactly as Julia predicted. He did not attack us publicly. He expressed concern. His firm issued a statement saying a confused private family matter and had been distorted by individuals who did not understand the history of the Vale estate. Then my employer placed me on administrative leave. My supervisor looked ashamed when she told me. The legal department says there may be a conflict. Richard Wexler is part of the legal department. He advises the network. Has anyone accused me of misconduct? No. Then document that. She looked at me. What? Please state in writing that I have not been accused of misconduct and that this leave is based only on a potential conflict involving outside counsel. Margaret, I'm trying to help you. I know. Help me accurately. By 5 that afternoon, I had the email. Julia added it to the file. The next pressure came through family. Daniel's older sister, Carol, called me after years of polite distance. She said Richard had contacted her. He told me Hannah is trying to prove Danny wasn't really our brother. That is not what this is about. He said there could be testing, public records, reporters. Did he offer you anything? Carol became quiet. What do you mean? Did he offer money, legal help, or protection? He said the foundation might assist with my mortgage if this goes away. I closed my eyes. Carol, that is not assistance. That is payment. He said it was compassion. Ask him to put the offer in writing. He won't. Then ask yourself why. She hung up crying. 2 days later, she forwarded me a voicemail from Richard's associate. The message referred to family stabilization funds available if Carol signed a confidentiality agreement. It became evidence. The case crossed its point of no return when federal investigators found Helen. She had not been abducted. She had been frightened into leaving. Richard's private security consultant had visited her home with copies of old bank disciplinary files and threatened to accuse her of stealing from clients in 1981. He offered to relocate her temporarily while the false claims were resolved. Helen went with him because she believed she could be arrested. When investigators located her in a hotel in West Virginia, she agreed to testify. Her story filled the last major gap. Clara had returned to Pennsylvania in 1983. She came to Helen after giving birth and placing Daniel for adoption. She wanted to confront her father and expose Robert, but Benjamin Vale had suffered a serious stroke. Robert controlled access to him. Clara went to the Vale house anyway. Helen saw her enter. She never saw her leave. That statement turned a financial fraud investigation into a possible homicide inquiry. No body had been found, and after so many years, prosecutors were cautious. But records showed that Robert arranged for a section of the Vale estate grounds to be excavated and rebuilt as a reflecting pool. 3 days after Clara's return, the work had no permit. The contractor was paid in cash. The contractor's son still possessed his father's ledger. One entry read, "Emergency night. Work, W, present. Existing soil not to be removed from property." Investigators searched the property. The reflecting pool had been replaced by a garden decades earlier. Beneath the old foundation, they found a metal clasp from a woman's handbag, several pearl buttons, and human remains. Dental records confirmed Clara's identity. She had not abandoned her child. She had not entered the water. She had come home to tell the truth. Someone had made certain she could not. Richard came to my house the night before his deposition. He arrived alone at 7:30, wearing a dark overcoat. The porch light reflected softly on his glasses. I did not invite him inside. Hannah was upstairs. Owen was with her. Julia had instructed us to record any unexpected contact, so my phone was already running in my pocket. Richard looked tired for the first time since I had known him. "I came without lawyers," he said. "You are a lawyer." "That is not what I meant. What do you want?" "To prevent further damage." "To whom?" "To everyone." He looked past me into the hallway. "I never knew Clara. Your father did. My father is 93 years old and in poor health." Clara did not get to become 93. His jaw tightened, only slightly. You believe this is simple because you found a victim and a villain. I believe documents were forged. My father made mistakes. A body was buried. I cannot speak to that. You came here to speak." He lowered his voice. "The foundation is prepared to establish a private trust for Hannah. $8 million, tax protected. Her children would be secure. Your mortgage would be paid. Your employment issue would disappear. In exchange for what? A settlement. Confidentiality. No further cooperation with criminal investigators beyond what is legally required." I looked at him. "You want us to become another layer in the concealment?" "No. I want to separate a family tragedy from institutions that do good work. The institutions can survive the truth. You do not know that. The truth has a weight of its own, Mr. Wexler. Your family has been forcing other people to carry it." His polite expression disappeared. Not dramatically. His face simply became empty. "You should consider what happens if the court rejects your standing," he said. "You could lose your job, your savings, your home. Then I will lose them honestly." He studied me for several seconds. "Your mother made the same mistake." My breath caught. What mistake? "Believing evidence protects the person who holds it." He stepped back from the porch. Then he seemed to realize what he had said. I did not move. He left without another word. Julia sent the recording to federal investigators before midnight. At deposition the next morning, Richard denied threatening me. Then Julia played the audio. I was not in the room, but she described the moment afterward. Richard's attorney requested a break. The federal prosecutor refused. The deposition continued. Richard claimed the proposed trust had been a humanitarian settlement. He denied knowing Helen had been relocated. He denied reviewing Clara's probate file. He denied that his father had ever discussed Clara's disappearance. Julia placed a series of emails in front of him. One was dated 6 years earlier. Richard had written to the bank's historic records manager, "Maintain alert on any inquiry concerning Box 214, Clara Vale, Evelyn Keene, or Helen Mercer. Notify me directly before responding." Another email concerned the demolition of an old storage facility. Richard ordered all Vale estate records destroyed unless specifically required by the Foundation's retention policy. He claimed routine administration. Then Julia showed him a scanned letter recovered from the storage facility's backup archive. The letter was written by Robert Wexler to his son in 2004. It said, "Evelyn Keene may have retained copies. Her husband's adopted son is not to be contacted. If the Keene line discovers the connection, resolve privately and immediately." Richard stopped answering questions. The civil hearing took place 6 months later in probate court. Robert Wexler was medically unable to attend. Though investigators interviewed him at home, he denied killing Clara. He blamed a deceased groundskeeper and claimed Clara had threatened him with a knife. No physical evidence supported his account. The judge first considered whether Clara's death declaration should be vacated. Julia presented the forged letter, fabricated psychiatric report, Clara's recording, my mother's affidavit, Helen's testimony, the adoption decree, DNA results, and financial ledgers. The opposing attorneys argued that too much time had passed. The judge listened quietly. Then she said, "Time may limit certain remedies. It does not convert fraud into truth." Clara's original death declaration was vacated and replaced with a finding based on her actual remains and the verified date range of her death. The court recognized Daniel as her biological son and Hannah as his surviving child. That did not hand Hannah every dollar associated with the Vale name. Much of the original company had been sold. Some foundation funds were legally protected because they had been distributed to legitimate charitable programs. Julia had prepared us for that. We were not there to empty hospitals or cancel scholarships. We were there to trace assets wrongfully diverted from Clara's personal trust. The forensic accounting took 11 months. It revealed that Robert had used forged authority to seize shares and accounts worth approximately $4 million in 1981. Through reinvestment, property purchases, and partnership holdings, the traceable value had grown substantially. Some money could not be recovered, some had passed to innocent parties, but enough remained in Wexler-controlled entities to support a settlement of $26 million, plus transfer of a small group of rental properties and reimbursement of legal costs. Hannah did not celebrate when Julia told us. She sat at my kitchen table, in the same chair where we had first the dress. "What would Dad think?" she asked. "He would ask whether you are safe," she nodded. "Then that's what I wanted to do, make us safe." The criminal cases moved separately. Richard pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy to conceal financial records. He lost his law license and served a federal sentence. His father was charged in connection with Clara's death and the original fraud, but his health declined before trial. The court found him incompetent to proceed. He died the following year, under guarded medical supervision. Some people said that meant he escaped justice. Perhaps he escaped a verdict. He did not escape the truth. His name was removed from the foundation. A public report documented the forged records, stolen assets, intimidation, and concealment surrounding Clara's disappearance. The Vale Foundation was placed under independent management. Its legitimate charitable work continued. Helen testified publicly and was cleared of wrongdoing. My employer invited me to return. I did, but only long enough to complete the projects I had left unfinished. 6 months later, I accepted a position with a nonprofit that helps older people detect medical billing fraud and financial exploitation. It paid less, I slept better. Hannah and Owen postponed their wedding while the case unfolded. When they finally married, Hannah wore the $19 dress. We had it professionally restored, but she refused to remove the section of blue stitching where Clara's name had been found. Inside the new hem, she added 3 names: Clara, Daniel, Evelyn. The wedding took place in a public garden in May. There were 38 guests, folding chairs, lemon cake, and no photographers from newspapers. Before walking down the aisle, Hannah stood beside me beneath a maple tree. "I feel like they're all here," she said. I knew who she meant. Her father, the grandmother she never met, my mother, who had carried a secret longer than anyone should have to. "They are," I told her. "Not as ghosts. As choices." Hannah used part of the settlement to purchase a modest home near her work. She paid off her student loans and Owen's. She established an education fund for children aging out of foster care. Because her father had once been a child whose identity depended on strangers keeping promises, she did not buy a mansion. She did not leave her job. She still used coupons and complained about the price of groceries. I sold our brick house 2 years later and moved into a smaller place with a wide back porch and enough yard for roses. For the first time in years, I planted without thinking about resale value. Helen visited one spring afternoon. She brought a photograph we had never seen. It showed Clara sitting on the steps of a small house, holding baby Daniel against her shoulder. She was not smiling for the camera. She was looking down at him. There was peace in her face. Helen told me Clara had chosen the Keene family because Daniel's adoptive mother had lost 2 pregnancies and still kept a nursery prepared. She wanted him loved, Helen said. He was. I know. We sat on the porch until the light changed. For years I had wondered whether my mother should have spoken sooner, whether she could have gone to the police, whether Clara might have survived if someone had acted differently. But fear in 1981 was not the same as fear now. Robert had influence. Clara was unmarried and pregnant. My mother was a working-class seamstress, with no money for lawyers, and no reason to believe powerful men would be challenged by her word. She preserved what she could. She hid truth inside the one object Robert would never imagine mattered: a wedding dress from a wedding that did not happen. Sometimes courage is not a grand act. Sometimes it is keeping a notebook, saving a key, writing down a name, refusing to destroy what someone else may one day need. People often describe our story as one about an inheritance. I understand why. $26 million is a number large enough to dominate any headline, but money was only the catalyst. The real inheritance was evidence. Clara left her voice. My mother left her records. Helen left her testimony. Daniel left behind a daughter who cared more about who he had been than what he might have owned. And I learned that patience is not weakness. Documentation is not coldness. Calmness is not surrender. The people who tried to bury Clara depended on shame, confusion, and time. They believed that if enough years passed, facts would become rumors, and rumors would become silence. They were wrong. The truth had been stitched into the hem. It waited there through decades of dust, church donations, cardboard boxes, and strangers' hands until my daughter paid $19 and brought it home. She did not just discover wealth. She recovered a woman's name. She did not just become financially secure. She became free from a lie that had shaped her family before she was born. And I did not defeat a powerful man by becoming louder than he was. I defeated his story by keeping better records. So I ask you, dear listeners, what would you have done if you found that key inside the dress? Would you have opened the box, contacted the family, or walked away before the danger reached your door? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reminded you that truth can survive in the smallest places, please share it with someone who may need that reminder. Subscribe, stay careful, and never assume that an old piece of paper has nothing left to say.